It is Monday, June 26, 2023, and welcome to episode 236 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm Lester Munson, NSI Senior Fellow, and I'm joined by Morgan Vigna, also an NSI Senior Fellow, and Jamil Jaffer, NSI's founder and executive director. Today, we're going to talk about what the heck is going on in Russia. Russia. Pretty shocking developments over the weekend. I think all of our listenership has been paying attention to this. Essentially, there was a near civil war in Russia as Yevgeny Prigozhin's Wagner troops marched on Moscow. They came within 100 miles or so of the city before diplomacy, evidently from Aleksandr Lukashenko, the dictator of Belarus, intervened, talked with Prigozhin, and persuaded him to end the rebellion, insurrection, revolt, civil war, call it what you will. And I think Morgan's going to have some thoughts on what it was. So I think there's a whole ton of issues here to think about. Chaos in Russia. Does Putin actually have control of the country? What will other leaders in the region, including Lukashenko and the Chechen leader and other folks inside Russia, think of his grasp on power? Is this the beginning of the end for Vladimir Putin? And also, what does this mean for the not the civil war, but the war in Ukraine? Russia invaded Ukraine 16 months ago. A lot of people thought that Russian troops were going to roll into Kyiv. Now, instead, they're almost rolling into Moscow. So just an incredible turnaround of events in the last few hours. Lots to unpack here. Morgan, I want to go to you first. What are your thoughts about these amazing events we saw over the weekend?
Yeah, this mutiny by Prigozhin really makes Vladimir Putin out to be incredibly weak. It shows the cracks in his leadership and the limits of it. At the same time, though, if Putin wants to gain credibility, not only with his own military, but with his people, Prigozhin needs to find himself on the wrong side of the balcony with his head within Red Square. I mean, Putin needs to set an example here if there's any hope of maintaining and restoring his credibility. At the same time, if we look at what's going on in Ukraine, bombs are still falling in Kiev over the weekend. And so I think we need to maintain sight of that there is still a war going on. Just because a mutiny occurred over the weekend, a short-lived one at that, we still have people dying in Ukraine. Russians are still killing Ukrainians. And now is the time where Ukraine and Zelensky really need to step up and maintain the momentum on their counteroffensive.
Jamil, what are you watching?
You know, I totally agree with Morgan. I think it's a really important moment for the Ukrainians, and they need to surge forward. The U.S. and our allies need to provide them as much support as possible. Now's the time to get those M1A1 Abrams tanks in the fight. The British Challengers, these Leopard 2s they've gotten, not from the Germans, but the German tanks, have been very successful on the battlefield. We need more of that. The F-16s we're training them on, the sooner those can get in the fight, the better. I think there's a real opportunity here with the Wagner troops essentially off the field for some period. With Russian troops, potentially their morale potentially being sapped away. You've got these convicts out there who've been conscripted, and they've got to be wondering, is Putin really in charge? What am I fighting for here? If my own, nation's people are marching against our capital, the military that I fought alongside. So this is obviously a deep concern for Vladimir Putin. He's got to be looking around at everybody around him, including all the oligarchs he made very rich, and saying to himself, are these guys getting the knives out for me? And if so, maybe he engages in a purge, and maybe it's that very purge that does him in. I agree with Morgan that he needs to take out Prigozhin if he's going to be successful. It's going to be hard, but, Vladimir Putin's got a penchant for Novichok, pushing people off of balconies, as Morgan rightly said. So we'll see what happens.
So I totally agree with you guys on this. Shockingly, I think we're all in similar places. Here's a couple of thoughts. I think Putin is obviously in a weaker spot. We should be thinking about in the next few months who is possible to replace Putin as the leader of Russia, whatever Russia looks like. I'm going to say something slightly nuts. Add Aleksandr Lukashenko to that list of people who could end up running Russia going forward. Yeah, this is someone who already knows how to be an autocrat, already knows how to run a security state. He speaks Russian. He's basically Russian himself. The Belarusians are very close cousins of the Russian people. He's right there. He's the guy who cut the deal with Prigozhin. His stock is rising rapidly. Put him on the list of people who could be running Russia. Also watch Ramzan Kadyrov, the Chechen leader. His guys had been fighting alongside Russians in Ukraine. He was taking the side of Putin during the current chaos. So he's kind of the anti-Prigozhin. Keep an eye on him. I'm not saying he can run all of Russia, but let's watch what he's doing, because there's.
Yeah,
I don't. Do you really know that? I mean,
no chance. Come on,
no chance.
Be serious.
We also didn't think Prigozhin and Wagner would end up marching on Moscow. We also didn't think once they were marching that they would stop. We also didn't think Lukashenko would be the guy who brought peace to Russia. There's like a whole lot of stuff that we never predicted that has happened just over the past weekend. So let's have some humility and start thinking very broadly about what the possibilities could be for Russia. Remember, Russia is, aside from, we keep thinking of Russia as a component of the old Soviet Union. Russia itself is a conglomeration of different groups of people and is insecure. This is a huge country, very different cultures inside Russia itself. The ability of Moscow to hold it all together is now in question. So pay attention to the periphery of Russia, whether it's the war in Ukraine, whether it's Belarus, whether it's the Chechens or some other group that may decide they're going to make a run at things. There's going to be total chaos in Russia going forward. All right, and Morgan, I want to also get to you. You had some thoughts when we were talking earlier about Xi Jinping and what he thinks of this. Please share.
Yeah, Les, that was some real outside the box thinking there.
Thank you.
Very creative.
Exactly. Like very far outside, like not on this planet outside the box.
So Xi Jinping and Russia. So look, I think the United States, as we've heard before, Biden has been very deliberate in telling the Chinese not to deliver weapons to Russia for their war in Ukraine. I don't think Xi has not delivered weapons because Biden told him not to. I think he hasn't done it because he doesn't have the full faith and confidence in Putin and his ability to prosecute that war in Ukraine, or frankly, Putin as a leader. I think Xi has seen the cracks in the Russian system, and he's not willing to make a poor investment. So I think we may see a continuation of equipment such as jet engines, microchips, et cetera, continuing that flow to Russia. But I don't think the Chinese want to make a poor investment here.
Jamil, do you want to talk about your views of the intelligence community?
Well, look, I mean, I think there's been a debate about whether we knew this was coming or not. I think people aren't parsing the words quite right. I think the U.S. intelligence community made clear that they saw something happening. They didn't know what it was. They didn't think Prigozhin was going to do what he did. Not by any stretch of the imagination. No one could have. And so all these people who are reading impressions into the intelligence community are not reading what the intelligence community actually said. They did brief the Gang of Eight, but just about Prigozhin, the fact that he was building up troops and that he was pissed off at Moscow. If you didn't know that from reading the Washington Post or the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, I mean, that's pretty much what they did also. There's no surprises there. So I'm not buying the prescience that people are ascribing to the intelligence community that it's not even ascribing to itself.
All right, folks, just a quick reminder, don't use any of our predictions as investment advice. Don't use it as gambling advice. We are as wrong as anyone else in our predictions of what is going to happen in the near future. Okay.
It won't be the Chechen leader.
Don't say that.
No, will not be. That's ridiculous. Ridiculous.
Don't predict that. Do not predict that.
Note it. You can bet on it.
Jamil, that's enough. That's a wrap. Thanks to Brooke Aga Khan from NSI and Claude Jennings for the help producing today's episode. Please join us again on Wednesday for another episode of Fault Lines, the podcast that gets you smart fast on the national security debates shaking up America. Fault Lines is also now up on YouTube, so check out our podcast video on NSI's YouTube page. And if you like what you heard and saw, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.